Hi, my name is Andy Zich, and I work at Caterpillar, but I'm here today to tell you a story that has nothing to do with Caterpillar. I'm here to talk about an organization that I'm a part of, and I want to tell you a story about a couple of kids. So this is Yvonne. Yvonne was born in Africa in a rural village, a small mud hut in a country called Côte d'Ivoire. And Côte d'Ivoire is located, like I said, in Africa between Liberia and Ghana. And I also want to introduce you to Parker. Parker was born in Lapeer, Michigan. And Parker is a little bit of a wild child. He enjoys dancing, playing in a sandbox, and watching the movie Home over and over again. Part of the story, I also wanted to introduce you to a couple of guys, and one of them is Gary. Gary is an anesthesiologist. He was born in Oregon and currently lives and works in Rockford, Illinois with his wife, Sylvia. And he's got 2 grown children and 4 grandkids. And in his spare time, he enjoys traveling and visiting with his grandkids, 2 of which live in Chicago and the other 2 live out in Oregon. I also want to introduce you to Ed. Ed lives in Bloomfield, Michigan, with his wife Tanya, and he's a pipe fitter that works for Janssen Refrigeration. He has 2 daughters. His eldest daughter lives in France, where she works, and his youngest daughter is finishing up nursing school in Michigan. In his spare time, he enjoys boating during the summer, and in the winter, cross-country skiing. So Yvonne was born, like I said, in Africa to a young mother, and he was born with a birth defect. Yvonne was born with bilateral club feet, and it's a deformity causing Yvonne to have his ankles turned in, and he actually walks on the side of his foot or his ankles. His father rejected him at birth, and in his country, kids with deformities don't actually go to school. In some cases, they're actually killed because the community and the families don't feel like they're enabled or have the medical facilities to be able to help or deal with their conditions. So Yvonne was actually taken by his maternal grandmother to the capital city of Abidjan, and they were homeless. They begged for food as the vendors came in for each day to sell their goods, and they did that for 3 years. And when Yvonne was 3, we don't know who, but somebody found him and entrusted him to a mission from the United States called the Children's Medical Mission West, and they're located in Waynesville, Ohio. So Yvonne came to the U.S. in January of last year, and he was entrusted with a very generous host family, and this is Yvonne and his first host mother, Holly. In January, the same month that Yvonne came to the U.S., he was fitted with his first set of casts to help correct his club foot issue. In the months that followed, he actually had several sets of casts. Here's some pictures of him with those colorful casts on. And then in April of last year, he had his first surgery. The doctors cut his Achilles tendon and recast his foot, both of his feet. Despite significant progress, as you can see from this picture, the doctors weren't able to correct the problem with his right foot fully, and they had exhausted all of their opportunities and options. And thankfully for Yvonne, a world-renowned clubfoot specialist from the University of Iowa named Dr. Morkulendes offered to do his case or take his case pro bono. The problem is that they lived in Ohio, Yvonne did with his host family, and the doctor actually lived in Iowa. and it's an 8-hour drive, and the medical mission that was caring for Yvonne didn't have the funds to be able to transfer him back and forth on commercial planes. Really, the 16-hour drive was an option, round trip, but his host family, it cost them money as well, and they really struggled with a time commitment to get him back and forth with 16 hours per appointment. Now back to Parker. Parker was born in 2015, and when he was 18 months old, or just a few weeks after he turned 18 months old, on August 31st last year, his mother noticed a little redness in his left eye. It got worse the next day, and just a couple days later, he was taken to the hospital. And you can see his eye pretty swollen there. In the hospital, the doctors diagnosed Parker with an aggressive form of retinoblastoma in both of his eyes. And retinoblastoma, for those that don't know, is eye cancer, and it was very aggressive. So on September 7th, 8 days after his mother noticed some redness in his eye, surgeons in Detroit removed his left eye. The same day, they started a chemotherapy regimen called systematic chemotherapy, and it was intended to save his right eye. And they did that for 3 months. And on December 2nd, they had some bad news. The chemotherapy wasn't working, and they had to try something else. The doctors gave his parents 2 options. One is to do radiation on his right eye, which would likely take the remainder of his sight, or to try a new chemotherapy called intra-arterial chemotherapy. The problem with this was that it was only able to be administered in Philadelphia, and they lived 10 hours away from Philadelphia. So, as most parents, I think, would do, they decided to take Parker to Philadelphia. And so they embarked on the 10-hour drive, with Parker being sick, his mother being pregnant, and his father was out of work at the time to care for Parker and his family. And so the financial burden of the trip was significant for them. When they arrived in Philadelphia, his parents got bad news right away. The tumor in the right eye had gotten worse, and there was seeds and a new tumor forming. So despite the bad news, the doctor actually was quite optimistic about the prognosis and what she could do for him. And he would need several trips back and forth to Philadelphia for her to be able to give him the treatments he needed. So remember Gary and Ed now. I'm guessing some of you are wondering how these 2 guys played into this story. So Gary, the anesthesiologist from Rockford, and Ed, the pipe fitter from Michigan, actually have something in common. They're both private pilots. And both Gary and Ed actually own their own airplanes. So I'm guessing most of you have figured out how these guys probably fit into this story now. And this is a picture of Gary and Yvonne, with Yvonne's 2 host mothers. So at different times, Yvonne has been entrusted with 2 different host families. And actually, Gary and Yvonne are considered friends. They hit it off right away when they met. And Gary and his wife actually travel with Yvonne on many of his appointments. They transport him on many of his, not just one. And this is a picture of Holly and Yvonne on one of those flights, actually heading from Ohio over to Iowa. And this is Yvonne with his doctor and one of his nurses. And I'm very happy to inform you that after about 1.5 years in the U.S., and he has traveled back to visit his family in Africa, but he's been here for the bulk of the time getting treatments. And after countless surgeries and appointments and casts, Yvonne actually has flat feet now, that you can see from the picture here. And not only does he have flat feet, but for the first time in his life, he's actually running and wearing shoes. This is Yvonne with both of his host moms. You can see they're pretty happy there in this picture. And Yvonne's host mother, Holly, the one on the right, gave us a quote that I wanted to read here. She said, "We were transported each time by kind souls who graciously put up with a child crying in pain or just being an ornery 3-year-old, and we couldn't have done it without them." As for Parker and Ed, this is a picture of Ed with his plane and the flight path to the Willis Eye Institute where they were going. And Ed actually flew Parker and his mom on their final flight back from the Willis Eye Center. And here's a picture of them on that flight. And she actually, Parker's mom, learned about the concept of volunteer pilot organizations after that long 10-hour drive on their first visit. And the volunteer pilot organizations were able to actually take care and fly him on the rest of his missions after that. So on that last trip to Willis Eye Center, his parents actually learned on April 28th, so just a month ago, that the surgery and treatments worked, and they eliminated the tumor and the seeds, and he's in full remission now and has sight in his right eye. So Parker's mom also had some words for the pilots that helped them during this very difficult time. And she said, "Thank you so much for all the pilots. Without everyone who gave us this opportunity, my son might have had a very different story. I have a little boy whose favorite color is apparently purple, and his favorite thing to do is pick those quote-unquote flower pretty yellows in my yard. I've been given so many dandelions I've lost count." So the organization that made these flights possible is called LifeLine Pilots. And LifeLine Pilots is one of many volunteer pilot organizations across the country. And they're based right here in Peoria, Illinois. The mission of LifeLine Pilots is to facilitate free air transportation through volunteer pilots for financially distressed passengers with medical or humanitarian needs. So a lot of our pilots, our patients, are actually too sick to be able to travel by car. So you've got the inconvenience and the expense of being able to travel by car, but a lot of the patients actually just can't endure the long car rides due to their medical conditions. One of the requirements of flying with a volunteer pilot organization is that you have to be ambulatory. So the patients actually have to be able to, with help, get themselves into and out of the planes. Gary and Ed are two of our several hundred pilots that we have in LifeLine Pilots, and they're incredibly generous. They donate their time, their plane, and the expenses of these trips for the opportunity for life-saving and life-altering treatments for these kids and adults. So LifeLine Pilots was founded in 1981. It's actually the oldest regional humanitarian volunteer pilot organization in the country. And it was founded in Champaign, Illinois. And 19 years ago, in 1998, LifeLine moved here to Peoria and has been located out at the Peoria Airport ever since. I wanted to show you, this is a map that shows not only the coverage area of LifeLine Pilots, but it also shows you the flight path for both Yvonne's and Parker's flights. You can see the area in green on the screen actually show you LifeLine Pilots area. There's another area on the East Coast that's covered by other volunteer pilot organizations. So an important thing to know is that we work closely with other volunteer pilot organizations to facilitate flights that come in and out of our region. And Parker's flight was a perfect example of that. We partnered with another organization and actually changed pilots in Pennsylvania, where one of the LifeLine pilots dropped him off and another pilot picked him and his family up. So despite thousands of missions and over 1,000 pilots that have been involved with this organization, there's evidence that the need is much larger than we've been able to serve. And really our biggest challenge is awareness, is people knowing that LifeLine Pilots and volunteer pilot organizations exist across the country and what we do and how we do it. So I hope the next time that you know of somebody or hear of somebody in need, that you'll be able to explain and tell them what a volunteer pilot organization does and refer them. Thank you.